Tell me what you've been up to apart from shoveling dirt. What's going on in your world?
Um, well, most of the time we're working on this thing in Switzerland,
Okay.
which is called Optimismo, and we're doing heaps of random things there. We're doing an animation, a book, um, the technical side of a building, but also like the cultural side of a building. We're kind of working with a pretty eclectic crowd over there, like a couple of snowboarders, someone who runs the lift company. It's not like a design team, but it's an eclectic design team to basically renovate a building, but in effect use that to renovate the whole mountain.
And it's a ski resort in Switzerland.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It's called Larks. It's like the fifth biggest ski resort in Switzerland.
Nice. And so you've got one building. How are you using that to do more?
Ah, yeah, good question. Um, well, it's sort of like they've had a like I worked with them for about 5 or 6 years, and they've like had this mountain-wide vision for ages that I helped them put together in terms of like energy, water, waste, food, and transport. And I find that like it's all cool having some big high-level vision, but it's a lot harder to actually achieve it. And it took probably like about 5 years for the whole board to actually really switch over and go, boom, sustainability is the most important topic for us across the
Okay.
board. And
Cool.
so now they've all kind of agreed this is what we need to focus on. And also, there's this interesting thing in the mountains where, like mountains around the world snowfall's decreasing, it's directly impacting their economy. So people running these businesses are, like it's in their interests, emotionally and economically to do something about climate change. So yeah, they're basically trying to push it now. And I guess like over 5 years, not a lot happened. Probably the last 2 years, lots happened. But we really needed something to shift the gears and accelerate things. So we're using a building as an example of how the whole mountain should function. And it's pretty radical. It's kind of like we're looking into composting toilets, like really, because, we need soil up there for growing trees. We're going to do a reforestation project. So actually it's cool to have more soil from humans, basically, is kind of the thinking. Yeah, it's like it'll be self-sufficient energy, water, waste. A reforestation project. It's at 2,200 meters high, so it's like going to be pretty hard to grow food, but we're actually going to be trying to grow food on site too. And even things like hydrogen groomers, they're kind of like one of the first resorts in the world that will have a hydrogen groomer.
So that's a run groomer.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, I think the Austrian word for it is like piston bully or something. I don't know what everyone calls it. I just grew up calling it a groomer. The thing that makes the slopes groomed, flat.
Yeah. I think we always called them Casboras. I think that was maybe like a brand name.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think piston bully is a brand name too. So that's probably where they use like maybe the majority of their emissions on the mountain because they're chewing through diesel, cruising around flattening.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, that sounds pretty amazing, man. How did you get, what sort of, what role did you play in changing people's minds and how did you see everyone kind of start to flip?
That's a good question. We It was pretty random, really. Like, I mean, I feel like the owner was always kind of on board, and then I think they're all lovely people and really well-meaning people, but I think not everyone always just it's not everyone's highest priority the environment always, and I guess somehow we just slowly did a few different things over the years, and I think it just kind of clicked after a while. And one of those things was like we'd probably made 2 or 3 different videos putting together the vision, and it ended up being like the video was the something that the owner would use to show people how the mountain worked, and it was quite like, sort of. I'm interested in this connection between technology and culture, and their culture up there is freestyle and snowboard. They're the #1 European freestyle resort. They basically invented the half pipe.
Okay.
And so we made a video which kind of connected freestyle and sustainability in some way. And he could use that cruising around, talking to people about the mountain. And then, I don't know, somehow I just keep them going back there each year. And I just sort of like, I remember the owner actually used to have a Hummer. And at some point in time, he was like, I'm getting rid of the Hummer and I'm getting a Tesla. And then he converted his house to be a net zero house and charges the Tesla with the house. And then one of the other board members slowly transformed his house. And then, I don't know, just like, and then I think also one of the guys, like his daughter, refused to go overseas because of the emissions. And I think all of these guys are just kind of like, you know, they're feeling the impacts of losing snow, and also their kids are wanting it. And the combination, I think it wasn't just the work we'd done, but I think for me, it's been a bit more like going there, helping out where I can, and I think they're ready now.
Yeah, it's so, because I think that's probably the hardest problem that we face is just getting people to shift their thinking on something that's might be different anyway to what they're used to, but also now it's become a political issue when it really is not a political, or shouldn't be a political issue. So yeah, I'm always interested to hear about stories where people can describe the kind of mechanism for people to change other people's minds, because it's so difficult and we face it, like as designers, we face it often.
I think I'm maybe not, I don't know that I am in the space of changing people's minds, if you know what I mean. Like, I think that I like to provide sort of objective advice and provide people with feedback as to how to get to achieve a target of, say, zero carbon or zero waste or water neutral. But it's sort of really up to them if they want to do it or not. And I think that was a big flip for me with my thinking, particularly recently, and we've spoken about this before, but like, I don't think people don't want change. It's a human instinct to be against change. And so I think, if anything, if you try and change people, I find there's less chance of them changing because they will resist. Whereas I feel like sort of people need to change themselves and people need to want that. And so I think that on one hand, I think that it needs to happen itself, if you know what I mean. There needs to be almost like a natural mechanism towards it. But I think if you do want to accelerate change, I think it's by not trying to change people, but by connecting change with culture, is my view on things.
Cool. And could we talk about a new normal?
Yeah, sure.
Do you want to tell us about it?
So, well, what would you like to know? The how it came about, or just like what the final outcome was, or?
Yeah, I suppose just give us an overview, and I'd like to hear about where it's at right now, and you know when it's going to launch, all that stuff.
Yeah, cool. Well, I guess basically, I've been living in Melbourne for like, I don't know, about 6 years now or something, and I just kept on wanting to get the city to give me the gig to do the strategy on how to make the whole city 100% renewable, water neutral, and zero waste. And after a while, I just kind of realized that there was no gig for it. So we just spent like about a year and a half doing all the numbers to work out what it would cost to transform the entire city using nothing new. So thus the new normal, which is funny because the term has now, post-COVID, has been hijacked for something else in a sense, but we're sticking to it.
Well, I think you maybe tapped into the zeitgeist a bit. I've heard it mentioned a few times for a few things, like post hearing you use it. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it's great. I think it actually probably helps the cause.
Yeah, yeah, true. And I guess it is, it's, I guess that was the thing, is that we wanted to position it as not something radical or innovative or sustainable, but just what is, let's reposition what is normal. And so, yeah, we basically looked around the world about where these initiatives required to transform our city were currently happening. And then we just said, if we copy and paste all of them into Melbourne, and basically applied every single cost-effective initiative, every profitable initiative in Melbourne, how much would it cost and how much space would it require, and could we get there? Could we, be a sort of a self-sufficient city? And I didn't even know if the answer would come out that we could. I just sort of was interested in the answer myself. And yeah, it's quite achievable, actually. It's quite really logical. If you look at how the city currently functions, and then if you look at how it could function, there's just a lot of opportunities that we're currently kind of missing out on. And so what we did was, that's all cool, like some spreadsheets and a kind of boring report that no one's going to read. But then for Design Week, we sort of went out to 15 different awesome architecture firms across Melbourne, which were ranging from sort of, quite ambitious firms to quite conservative firms, big and small, young and old, because we wanted to get a nice diverse mix of sort of different architecture firms in Melbourne. And we asked each of them, including yourself, to help us to sort of visualize what this might look like in the city, but B, and I think more importantly, is less, help work with us to move past why are we doing this and what are we doing, but moving into how are we doing this. And that whole philosophy was around connecting those solutions, which are just kind of boring technology, and combining them with culture. And if and with the main ethos that let's empathize with people instead of trying to jam it down their throat and tell them how to be. If the majority of the population in Melbourne are going to be forced to change at some point in time, how do we make that easier on everyone? So so 15 cool renders came about. We pulled together a pretty cool report. We got Sally Cap in the end to write a foreword for it, which was pretty awesome. It's a really cool foreword. And then we've sort of like pulled the whole thing together, and we're getting close to launching it. So it's sort of, we once COVID hit, we had to cancel the workshop that was the kickoff for the whole thing at the NGV. And so we just sort of changed our approach and decided that we would rework the whole report to be positioned as a stimulus opportunity. The whole thing is, we've budgeted at about $100 billion over 10 years, and that would create a self-sufficient city and pay for itself in less than 10 years. And I think probably like 4 months ago, I was sounding like a lunatic, talking to people about $100 billion reno of the city. And I think now it's kind of not such a crazy idea to blow $100 billion on the city, particularly if it's profitable, and particularly when it creates 80,000 jobs in construction and 40,000 jobs ongoing from there.
And it's 10 steps, isn't it? 10 steps to turn Melbourne into a self-sufficient city.
Mm. Yeah, so we kind of try to simplify the whole thing, rather than being like a zero carbon city and a zero waste city and like, let's freak people out with how complicated it is. We thought, actually, let's just hit 10 major items that are required to get us there. And they're kind of broad brush, of course it's more complicated than just 10 simple steps, but in effect, those 10 steps will get us pretty much there. And so they are to electrify the entire transport system, energy storage, which is actually in the transport system, electrify all buildings, energy efficiency, in all buildings, so really pushing the limits in terms of energy efficiency. Solar architecture, introducing as much solar on buildings as possible. Wind and solar in terms of Latrobe Valley, so converting Latrobe Valley from coal onto renewables. Water treatment, so sewer water treatment basically, and reuse across the city. And then waste to energy, organic waste to energy, ending landfill. And they're the first 9 initiatives. And they were all just about transforming the existing city. So quite often in sort of architecture and design, we're quite often talking about new buildings. And this was actually just saying, actually, we've got to fix up the existing city first. And then the last initiative was about new architecture, bringing in a net zero code for all new buildings. So the new stuff that comes up doesn't add to the problem from a construction emission perspective or an operations emission perspective.
Nice. Well, it sounds amazing, and we're really happy to be part of it. And so we're launching what, in a couple of weeks?
That's the plan. Yeah, we've been sort of negotiating with a few people behind the scenes of how we're going to launch it. So that's not fully finalized yet. And I guess on one hand, it's kind of exciting to get it out there, and I'm feeling like we should rush and try and get it out as soon as possible. On the other hand, I feel like it's good to just sort of wait till we've got it all together in a really nice sort of organized format. So a website will come. We're creating videos of each of the initiatives, including yours, as examples of how we can get the whole thing started. We're going to try and launch it with a crowdfunding campaign as well. And hopefully there'll be weekly webinars with a few exciting organizations that I can't confirm yet. But that will be hopefully a way to get it out and create some noise. And I think in effect, it's sort of, I'd see it like there's always this discussion of like, is it the government's fault, or is it business's fault, or is it the general public's fault? And I think actually that we're all responsible. And I think particularly, the government should do more. Businesses should be providing this stuff. But I think to launch this thing, it's a really, really important component of it is that we get a lot of public support. So we're hoping to sort of push it out as basically a petition to say to state government that we would like to realise this as a sort of public-private partnership and actually turn it into something from a sort of theoretical study into something that's in construction, basically.
Well, it sounds really cool, Ross. I'm sure it's going to go really well. It'll be an interesting road, I think, just seeing how it all unfolds, and it'll probably lead into all sorts of other opportunities, I would assume.
Definitely. So what are your views on this topic? How do you think it's most effective to realize a transition like that, or to accelerate a transition like that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I suppose we just need an approach that kind of comes at the problem from a lot of different angles. And I think it's, I think we need, a top down and a bottom up approach. So we probably need, we need people, we need government policies that affect change, but we also need lots of firms and people on the ground doing smaller actions that'll help, or smaller businesses and activities and projects. But I think, like you say, I think the most important thing is just getting that kind of groundswell of interest in people, getting people to care about it. And if people can be emotional about these things and connect with it in a kind of really meaningful way, I think if people can see value in something like this, if people can see that their life will be better, I think that is incredibly powerful. If people aren't doing it, if people are reluctantly agreeing to do something, even though that they know it's going to cause them a bit of short-term pain, and then and they're doing it because they feel like they have to. I don't think that's, obviously that's not as strong as if people are doing something because they love it and because they think it's going to improve their life. It's just, there's a massive amount of, I suppose there's a lot of power in that. So yeah.
Definitely. And I think that's what's been exciting about the way all of the architecture firms have sort of worked with each of the solutions is to give back to the city beyond just just the sort of reduction in emissions, and also even the fact that this technology is profitable. Still, that those two arguments are not necessarily convincing enough for everyone. Yeah, and I think what's exciting is how we could introduce these initiatives to give back in terms of culture and atmosphere and experience in the city.
When you, just going back to what you said earlier about the ski, about your work in Switzerland,
yeah,
I think that just repeatedly having conversations with people and just kind of giving them the same message in a really non-aggressive or just sort of non-emotional way. Do you think that is part of the reason you had success there, and is sort of an approach that we can use in Melbourne?
I think I sometimes have architects ask me to help them convince a client of something.
Yeah.
And I think maybe it's the wrong client, if you know what I mean. It's like, to me, if people can't see this stuff as just being logical now, then, they're not very progressive people, basically. And, it's like my view is that there's enough people out there to work with that get it. And it's about finding those people to work with. And so I think that I kind of innocently, when I moved to Melbourne, thought I could work with just cold-hearted developers that didn't give a shit at all and help them see the technical financial argument for it. I remember sitting down at one of the first meetings next to the guy who was selling all the apartments on this 40-story building. And I just turned to him and I said, like, hey, even just from a natural light perspective or a thermal comfort perspective, can I help you with some information that might help you sell this to people? And he just was like, no, I don't need that. and I just, I think there's a lot of people that want to sort of have no interest in this topic, and they just kind of want to put the blinkers on. And I think that if you spend your time trying to convince those people, for me, it's like, it's wasted energy. And I think my view's always been a bit more like, if I can find people that I am friends with, that I can work with, that are like-minded, then I will have much more sort of a higher success rate of actually achieving some things than trying to convince someone that I just don't see eye to eye on.
And do you think that, because I think the same thing with Dreamer often, and I was just thinking it earlier today, I think that my target market is probably people who are, for lack of a better term, early adopters. And I think that I want to be able to have, I want to attract clients that are big picture thinkers that already probably understand design. They're reading blogs. They have a fairly good, maybe overall view of what sustainability and design and urban design is starting to look like, and what it can be. And there's not heaps of those people around. So I think that it means that for Dreamer, our market is probably relatively small, but it means that the people that we do projects with, those projects can be amazing. But then I wonder, like, the strategy then that we do a fewer number of amazing projects that help to convince or help to shift thinking, there's a kind of trickle down into other projects. I wonder how, I suppose these early adopters kind of start to influence, future work going forward.
I think that I think like there's quite often like in environmental spaces lots quite often this argument around like the solution. You know, it's like, for example, with environmentally, do you do baby steps or do you do the extreme stuff? You know what I mean? It's like, you know, which is more important? Is it better to have an example that's perfect, or is it better to help someone big and bad do 10%? And I guess the reality is they're all beneficial. It all helps, and I think there's not. So I think rather than say one or the other, it's like, you know, that and that. But I just think that sort of, yeah, if you're wondering where to focus to try and achieve something in that space, I think the shortcut is finding the right people that are interested, rather than you know, rather than convincing people that aren't. And it's kind of like, you know, there's that bell curve of the population. It's kind of like the sort of like 10% are laggers, 10% are leaders, and then you've got the majority of the bell curve. And it's like the 10% that are laggers, like, you know, they're unengaged and unaware, right? And it's like they're the skeptics. They're you know, it's like there's no point convincing the skeptics. You know what I mean? And then it's like, you know, you got the leaders, and it's like, well, there's also arguably no point. You know, if they're already onto it, then sort of, you know, I mean, in terms of working with those kind of people from an architecture perspective, totally. But in terms of trying to convince someone who already gets the environment, you're just preaching to the converted. Versus, you know, the sort of majority of the population are actually engaged but unaware. And I think there's like, that's where you kind of got a good opportunity to kind of like bring people along.
All right. Well, thanks for the chat, Ross. Good to catch up with you.
You too.
We'll have to do it again soon.
Sounds good.
All right, mate. Talk to you soon.
Cheers, Ben.
Bye.
See you later.